Man, this one right here hits deep. Flip Wilson wasn't just funny, he was brilliantly funny. He made America laugh during a time when being a black man on television was almost impossible. In the early 1970s, the Flip Wilson Show was pulling in over 40 million viewers every week. He became the first African American to host a successful variety show on national TV. That's history right there. But here's the crazy part. Despite all that success, Flip Wilson still doesn't have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. How does that even happen, man? How can someone who broke barriers, made the world smile, and paved the way for generations be forgotten like that? Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea. Sit back, and let's start this journey together. You know, before the bright lights and the laughs, before Geraldine and the catchphrases, Flip Wilson's story was one of pain, poverty, and pure survival. He was born Claro Wilson, Jr. on the 8th of December, 1933, in Jersey City, New Jersey, the 10th child in a struggling household. His parents were poor, man, really poor. Times were so hard during the Great Depression that food was a daily question, not a guarantee. His father worked odd jobs just to keep the family afloat, but it wasn't enough. His mother, exhausted and overwhelmed, eventually left the family when Flip was around 7 years old. That moment changed everything. With his mom gone and his dad unable to care for so many kids, young Claro and several of his siblings were placed in foster homes. Some reports say he bounced around at least a dozen of them, 12 different families, before he even became a teenager. Just imagine that. 12 homes, 12 sets of strangers, 12 times having to start over. No stability, no comfort, just constant change. That'll do something to a kid. But here's the thing, even in those hard times, Flip had something special. He had humor. Teachers noticed it, social workers noticed it, and every foster family he stayed with remembered that he could make anyone laugh. He used jokes to protect himself, to charm his way out of trouble, to make friends. When you're a kid in that situation, you either cry or you find a way to make people like you, and Flip chose laughter. By the time he was 16, Flip had enough. He dropped out of school and joined the United States Air Force, lying about his age just to get in. And man, that was a turning point. The military was tough, especially for a young black man in the 1950s, but Flip found his stage there. Fellow airmen said he was the funniest guy on base. Whenever the pressure got too heavy, he'd crack a joke, do a funny impression, and lift everyone's spirits. His commanding officers would send him to entertain troops instead of giving him regular duties. That's how naturally gifted he was. It was during this time that he got the nickname Flip. One of his buddies in the Air Force said, "You're always flipping out, man. You're a real flip." And that name stuck. From then on, Claro Wilson Jr. was just Flip Wilson. When his service ended, Flip came home with no money, no family connections, and no idea what to do next, but he had confidence. And that sense of humor never left him. He started working odd jobs, a bellhop, a cook, even a mail clerk, but his mind was always on making people laugh. He'd crack jokes at work, and people would tell him, "Man, you should be on stage." Eventually, he listened. In the mid-1950s, Flip started performing stand-up at small clubs in California. He was sleeping in his car some nights, just trying to make it. But that grind, that fire in his belly, came from those early days in the foster system. He knew what rock bottom looked like, and he wasn't afraid of it anymore. If anything, it fueled him. He performed anywhere he could: bars, military bases, coffee houses. His act wasn't like other comedians at the time. He didn't rely on vulgar jokes or anger. Flip's humor was smart, fast, and full of personality. He'd mimic people, tell wild stories, and switch voices like a radio show all by himself. People remembered his energy. He could turn a simple story about getting a haircut into a 10-minute masterpiece. But here's what makes his early story so powerful. Flip Wilson's comedy wasn't born out of privilege. It was born out of pain. The kid who grew up feeling unwanted found love through laughter. The boy who had no home built one on the stage. And even then, in those early years, he wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing belonging. You could feel it in the way he performed. He wasn't just trying to be funny, he was trying to connect. He wanted people to see him, to really see him. Maybe that's why his comedy always had heart behind the humor. It's wild to think about, right? This man who would one day make the whole country laugh started out as a foster kid just trying to survive the system. But that's what made him different. That's what gave him empathy, rhythm, timing, and that spark that couldn't be taught. So when he finally got that mic in his hand, it wasn't just a tool, it was a weapon against the world that had tried to forget him. Every laugh was proof that he mattered. And soon, the world started to notice. The clubs got bigger, the rooms started filling up, and before long, Flip Wilson, the foster kid from Jersey City, was about to take comedy to a place it had never been before. When Flip Wilson hit the stage, man, it was like watching lightning in human form. He wasn't the kind of comedian who yelled or cursed his way through a set. Nah, he was smooth, cool, and razor-sharp. His delivery was easy, but underneath that smile was precision. Every line, every pause, every expression was calculated to perfection. You'd laugh before you even realized why. That's talent, man. By the late 1950s, Flip was hustling the stand-up circuit in California and across the West Coast. He started out in little joints, places where you could hear the glasses clinking louder than the crowd. But word started to spread. There's this funny guy named Flip Wilson. Y'all gotta see him. Soon he was performing in San Francisco, LA, Las Vegas, anywhere that would hand him a mic. During one of those early gigs, he caught the attention of another comedy legend, Red Fox. Now, that's important. Red saw something special in Flip. Both men came from tough backgrounds, and both used humor as a weapon against pain. Red took Flip under his wing and helped him get booked in better venues. He even brought Flip to perform at some of his own shows. That friendship was a game changer. Through Red, Flip met more comedians and club owners, and he started getting steady work. But it wasn't just the gigs, it was the confidence. Flip started realizing he could hang with the best of them. In the early 1960s, he began appearing on television for the first time, small guest spots on shows like The Tonight Show and The Ed Sullivan Show. For a black comedian back then, that was no small deal. The entertainment industry was still heavily segregated, and most networks didn't believe a black comic could appeal to a white audience. But Flip didn't play that game. He wasn't just a black comedian, he was a comedian, period. His jokes didn't rely on race, they relied on wit. That's what made him stand out. Flip had this universal appeal. He could make anybody laugh, white, black, rich, poor, because his comedy was rooted in human truth. He'd talk about relationships, money, faith, everyday struggles, things everybody understood. He'd make a joke about church and have the whole room in tears. You didn't need to know his background to get it. You just had to be human. And man, people loved that. When he told a story, it was like you were sitting next to him on the porch, just listening to your funniest friend talk about life. That realness became his trademark. By 1965, Flip's career started to take off. He recorded his first comedy albums, Cowboys and Colored People and You Devil You. Both of them showed his quick wit and playful delivery, but they also had bite. He'd touch on race and politics with a smile, sneaking real social commentary into his punchlines. It was the kind of comedy that made you laugh and think. Audiences and critics began to notice. He won over the crowd wherever he went, from Harlem to Hollywood. Big stars started requesting him personally, talk show hosts, singers, producers. Flip was becoming that guy, the comedian's comedian. Then came the variety show circuit. He became a regular guest on programs like Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In and The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Carson loved him, said Flip had one of the sharpest minds in the business. And it showed. Every time he walked onto that stage, you knew something memorable was about to happen. One of Flip's biggest assets was his versatility. He could do voices, characters, and accents. He could improvise on the spot. And he never needed to put anyone down to get a laugh. That was rare in that era, especially in stand-up. Most comics leaned on mean jokes or shock value. Flip? He used charm. By the late 1960s, NBC executives were watching closely. They saw that this man had something no one else had: cross-generational, cross-racial appeal. They started testing the idea, what if we gave him his own show? That was revolutionary thinking. Remember, this was years before Saturday Night Live. Variety comedy was dominated by white hosts like Dean Martin or Carol Burnett. A black man leading a primetime show was almost unthinkable. But Flip didn't just want the gig, he wanted creative control. And that was bold, man. Most artists didn't have the power to ask for that, but Flip knew his worth. He said, "If you're gonna let me represent myself on national TV, you gotta let me do it my way." And somehow, NBC agreed. So in 1970, The Flip Wilson Show was born, and the rest is comedy history. But before that first episode even aired, Flip was nervous. He told friends he wasn't sure America was ready for it. A black host, playing multiple characters, sharing the screen with both black and white guests, it was risky. But the man took that risk anyway. Because if there's one thing Flip Wilson believed in, it was that laughter could break barriers. And he was right. What started as a gamble would soon turn into one of the biggest success stories in television history. The Flip Wilson Show would make him a household name, make people cry laughing, and change the way black performers were seen on TV forever. But as we all know, fame has a price. And while the world was laughing, Flip was fighting battles most people never saw. When The Flip Wilson Show hit the airwaves on the 17th of September 1970, man, it was like a cultural earthquake. Nobody had ever seen anything quite like it. Here was this smooth, funny black man hosting his own primetime variety show on NBC, cracking jokes, playing characters, and making everyone black, white, rich, poor laugh together. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a statement. Flip didn't open the door. He kicked it wide open. The show's format was simple but genius. Sketches, musical guests, and Flip doing his thing. But what made it special was his energy. Flip Wilson wasn't just telling jokes. He was creating a world every Thursday night. The show felt alive, unpredictable, joyous, and full of rhythm. One week he'd have the Temptations performing. The next he'd share the stage with Lucille Ball or Johnny Carson. Everybody wanted to be on The Flip Wilson Show. The energy was infectious, and the man at the center of it all was calm, charismatic, and effortlessly cool. Flip's signature character, Geraldine Jones, became an instant pop culture phenomenon. Geraldine wasn't just a character, she was a force. The way Flip embodied her with confidence, sass, and humor broke boundaries in comedy and gender performance. He wasn't mocking women, he was celebrating them, especially the strong, outspoken women he'd grown up around. When Geraldine said, "The devil made me do it," man, the world lost its mind. That line was everywhere, on t-shirts, mugs, buttons, even lunchboxes. And what's wild is that Flip didn't invent Geraldine for shock value. He once said she came from real women. He knew women who had been through pain but still carried themselves with dignity and strength. That's what made her different from other drag-style characters on TV. Geraldine wasn't a joke, she was a tribute. The show's writing was sharp, clean, and clever. Flip made sure of that. He refused to lean into stereotypes or cheap shots. He wanted his comedy to unite, not divide. And that decision paid off big time. In its first 2 seasons, The Flip Wilson Show was one of the top-rated programs on television, pulling in more than 40 million viewers each week. Think about that. 40 million people, every week, tuning in to watch a black man headline his own show during prime time in early 1970 America. That's historic. Flip was also making history behind the scenes. He was the first African-American entertainer to have full creative control over his own network show. That meant he had a say in everything, the sketches, the music, the guests, the production. It was rare even for white entertainers at the time. He was also one of the highest-paid TV stars in America. In 1971, Time magazine put him on its cover smiling, confident, dressed to the nines with the headline, "TV's First Black Superstar." That was huge. For so many people across America, Flip Wilson wasn't just a comedian, he was representation. He was proof that black excellence could shine on any stage. And man, the guest list was stacked. Aretha Franklin, Muhammad Ali, Richard Pryor, Ray Charles, the Jackson 5, Red Fox, even Bing Crosby. Flip made sure the show mixed the worlds of soul and mainstream entertainment. It wasn't black TV, it was just great TV. Behind the laughter, though, Flip was a perfectionist. He was heavily involved in every detail, sometimes staying at the studio late at night to edit sketches himself. He cared deeply about the image he projected. He wanted families to watch together, for his show to feel like home. That's why The Flip Wilson Show had no profanity, No cheap laughs, just heart and humor. But success brings pressure. As the seasons went on, the weight of being the face of progress started to take its toll. Flip was proud, but he was tired. People don't realize how heavy it was to carry the image of an entire race on your shoulders in the entertainment industry back then. By the fourth season, ratings began to drop slightly. Audiences were shifting, TV tastes were changing, and NBC started getting restless. Flip, always a perfectionist, began to feel burned out. He was juggling fame, money, and personal life, and the lines started to blur. In 1974, after just 4 years, The Flip Wilson Show aired its final episode. It had won 2 Emmy Awards, a Golden Globe, and countless hearts. But Flip? He was done for the moment. He walked away while he was still on top, saying he needed to regroup. People didn't understand it at the time, but looking back, it makes sense. The same man who once lived in foster homes, who had to fight for every bit of peace he got, suddenly found himself under a spotlight that never turned off. That kind of pressure can crush you, man. After the show ended, Flip still made appearances on TV guest roles, interviews, a few specials, but nothing ever matched the magic of his own show. Still, his impact was already set in stone. For 4 straight years, he had changed television. He showed the world that a black host could lead a hit show without compromise, without pandering, without pretending. He brought elegance, intelligence, and style to American comedy and made it look effortless. But as the lights dimmed, so did Flip's public appearances. The man who once made the world laugh louder than anyone started to disappear from the spotlight. And that's when the struggles behind the smiles began to surface. Fame, racism, relationships, money, all the things he'd worked so hard to outrun came back around. Man, the early 1970 that was Flip Wilson's world. He wasn't just a comedian anymore. He was a cultural icon. You couldn't walk down a street in America without hearing somebody quote Geraldine Jones, "The devil made me do it," or "What you see is what you get." Those phrases became part of everyday life. Flip's characters had crossed over into pop culture, and people loved him for it. You know you've made it when kids imitate you on the playground and parents quote you at dinner. That's what Flip achieved universal appeal. He wasn't just entertaining, he was connecting generations through laughter. By 1971, The Flip Wilson Show had hit its peak. Ratings were massive. We're talking 40 million viewers every week, man. That's Super Bowl numbers in today's terms. Every major star wanted to appear on his show, and NBC couldn't stop counting the money. Flip was everywhere. He won 2 Emmy Awards, one for Outstanding Variety Series and another for his personal performance. He also took home a Golden Globe in 1971 for Best Actor in a television series. Time magazine wasn't exaggerating when they called him TV's first black superstar. But it wasn't just about fame. Flip represented something bigger, hope. He came along right after the Civil Rights Movement, at a time when America was still healing, still divided. And here was this black man, smiling on national television, making everyone laugh together. He didn't talk politics, but his very presence was political. His success said, "We belong here too." What made Flip's comedy so powerful was its intelligence. He knew how to walk the line to address the truth of being black in America without ever turning his show into a lecture. His comedy made people think without making them defensive. He'd drop a line about racial double standards, and the audience would laugh, then pause like, "Hold up, that's true." Flip once said, "If I can make you laugh about something, maybe you'll think about it differently." That's real wisdom right there. He used laughter as a bridge between communities, between races, between pain and healing. Behind the scenes, his reputation was just as strong. Everyone from stagehands to guest stars said the same thing. Flip treated people with respect. No ego trips, no diva moments. He was humble, generous, and always made his crew laugh. He'd bring food to the set, crack jokes with the lighting guys, and make guests feel at home. He understood what it was like to be overlooked, so he made sure nobody on his set ever felt that way. One of the best examples of Flip's reach was how diverse his guest lineup was. He didn't just bring in black entertainers, he brought everyone. You'd see Ray Charles performing right after a sketch with Dean Martin. You'd see Lucille Ball laughing alongside Richard Pryor. It was a melting pot of talent, and Flip was the ringmaster, guiding it all with style and charm. And man, his timing unbelievable. Flip Wilson could control a crowd with just a raised eyebrow or a pause. He understood rhythm like a jazz musician. Every punchline landed with the precision of a drum beat. That's why his humor never felt forced. It flowed. He wasn't performing, he was vibing. But what made him so unique, especially to black audiences, was that he showed dignity and joy on TV at a time when that wasn't the norm. You didn't see black men in control on primetime television. Not like that. He wasn't playing a servant, a sidekick, or a stereotype. He was the star. He was the boss. And that mattered more than people realized. Flip Wilson became a millionaire almost overnight. He bought a beautiful home in Beverly Hills, drove flashy cars, and traveled the world. Man, it must have felt unreal for a kid who once bounced between foster homes. But even in his success, there was a certain sadness behind his eyes. People close to him said he carried his childhood pain quietly, that he never fully trusted the good times. He was happy, but cautious. Still, for a few golden years, Flip Wilson was unstoppable. Every Thursday night, he ruled the airwaves. Families gathered around the TV just to see what he'd do next. Geraldine would walk on stage and the crowd would explode before she even spoke. His sketches became legendary Reverend Leroy and the Church of What's Happening Now, the Small World skits, and his clever monologues about everyday life. Flip also changed the business side of comedy. His show proved that advertisers would pay big money for diverse programming. He paved the way for other comedians like Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, and Arsenio Hall to have their own platforms later. They all stood on Flip's shoulders and they knew it. But you know how it goes, fame can be a double-edged sword. The same spotlight that made him America's favorite funny man started to burn. Being the first comes with pressure, and being the only comes with loneliness. As the years went by, the weight of success started wearing him down. He wanted to keep making people laugh, but he also wanted peace. He'd seen too much struggle, too much fake love, and too many people who only cared about the money. By 1973, you could feel it, something in him was changing. The laughs were still there, but the sparkle was fading a bit. He started to pull back from the spotlight. He told friends he was tired of fighting to stay on top. Still, what he accomplished during those few years was something few ever achieve. He became a household name, broke barriers without bitterness, and left the world a little more united through laughter. He was the king of primetime comedy, and yet, even kings have to rest. But what nobody knew at the time was that behind the laughter, Flip Wilson was quietly battling personal demons, racism, stress, and heartbreak that fame couldn't fix. And soon, those battles would change everything. You know how people always say, more money, more problems? Man, for Flip Wilson, that was more than a saying, it was real life. Behind the smile, behind the million-dollar ratings and the fame, the pressure was starting to eat him alive. By the mid-1970s, Flip was one of the most recognized faces in America, but fame had a dark side. He'd worked his whole life to get love and validation, and now that he had it, he didn't know who to trust. Everyone wanted something from him, friends, producers, even strangers who saw him as a walking paycheck. It was lonely at the top, man. The show was still doing well, but Flip was tired. The long hours, the creative pressure, and the weight of being a trailblazer for black entertainers all began to take a toll. When the Flip Wilson show ended in 1974, people were shocked. Why stop when you're still winning? But Flip had already made up his mind he needed to breathe. He once said, "I just got tired of being Flip Wilson." That line hits hard, right? Imagine spending your whole life trying to build a name, only to realize that name is the thing weighing you down. After the show ended, he disappeared almost overnight. No big farewell, no dramatic exit. He just faded into the background. He made a few guest appearances here and there on The Tonight Show, The Love Boat, a couple of TV movies, but the energy was different. The spark that once lit up the screen was dimming. Part of it was exhaustion, but part of it was deeper disappointment. The entertainment industry had a way of celebrating you when you're hot and forgetting you when you're not. And being a black entertainer, that fall from grace came even faster. Racism in Hollywood was still very real, man. For all the smiles and awards, Flip had to fight tooth and nail just to be treated fairly. He once said in an interview, "They liked what I did on TV, but off camera, I was still just a black man trying to get paid what I was worth." He also struggled with the people around him. Fame attracts fake love, and Flip had his share of betrayals. He'd trusted the wrong folks, friends who became opportunists, business deals that went sour, lawsuits that drained him. For a man who had grown up with nothing, the idea of losing it all again must have terrified him. Then came the tabloid stories, messy divorces, financial disputes, accusations of being difficult. Some of it true, some of it not. But once the media smells blood, they don't stop. Flip didn't fight back publicly. He just pulled away even more. He told a friend once, "The more they talk about you, the less they know you." He had 4 children and loved them dearly, but fame had made family life complicated. His marriages didn't last, and he spent much of his later years trying to balance being a father with living a quieter life. He bought a small ranch in Malibu and later moved to Las Vegas, far from Hollywood. Even though he wasn't on screen as much, Flip still had fans everywhere. People would spot him in restaurants, at airports, and say, "Hey, Geraldine," and he'd smile, maybe drop a line or two. The devil made me do it, just to make them happy. That was still his nature. Even when he was tired, he wanted to make people laugh. But behind those moments, he was fighting personal battles, depression, frustration, and the feeling of being forgotten. It's wild to think that the man who once made the whole world laugh felt invisible in his final years of fame. In the late 1980s, Flip tried to make a comeback. He appeared in a few guest spots and even voiced some cartoon characters. But the industry had changed. New faces, new styles of comedy, new rules. The same people who once called him a genius now treated him like a relic of another era. And that hurt, man, especially for someone who gave so much to open those doors. By the 1990s, Flip was rarely seen in public. He kept to himself, living quietly with his kids and close friends. He didn't chase the spotlight anymore. In one of his rare interviews, he said, "I don't need to be famous to know I did good. That's wisdom, but you can hear the pain in those words too." His health started to decline in the late 1990s. He was diagnosed with liver cancer, a battle he kept private. Most fans didn't even know he was sick. Flip faced that disease the same way he faced everything else in life, with quiet dignity. On the 25th of November 1998, Flip Wilson passed away at his home in Malibu at just 64 years old. When the news broke, tributes poured in from across the country from comedians, actors, musicians, and everyday people who grew up watching him. They all said the same thing: Flip made us laugh when we needed it most. It was bittersweet, man, because while the world mourned him, it also reminded people of something they'd forgotten: how much he had done, how much he had changed. And yet, to this day, Flip Wilson still doesn't have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Think about that. One of the most groundbreaking entertainers in television history, a man who broke barriers, brought people together, and redefined comedy, no star. It's a reflection of how Hollywood sometimes treats its pioneers, especially the ones who look like him. But the funny thing is, Flip probably wouldn't have cared. He never chased trophies. He cared about connection, the laughter, the joy, the humanity. Still, it doesn't sit right, man. Not for someone who gave so much. After the lights dimmed and the applause faded, Flip Wilson quietly stepped away from Hollywood. He didn't make a big announcement or throw a farewell party that just wasn't his style. He always said, "When I stop being funny, I'll stop showing up." And that's exactly what he did. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Flip tried to find peace. He had made enough money to live comfortably, but peace of mind, that was harder to come by. He bought a modest home in Malibu and focused on raising his children. Those who knew him said he was a devoted father, playful, funny, protective. He didn't talk much about show business anymore. If people brought it up, he'd smile and change the subject. But even though he lived quietly, Flip was still Flip. He couldn't help being funny. His neighbors in Malibu would see him at the grocery store or gas station cracking jokes, making people laugh just to see them smile. That was his natural rhythm, finding joy in small things. He also became deeply spiritual later in life. After years of chaos and fame, he started exploring faith again, reading scripture, meditating, and spending time with close friends who shared that side of him. It was like he was trying to balance all the laughter he'd given to the world with some peace for his own soul. In 1983, he made a rare return to television with a small role in the sitcom Charlie and Company alongside Gladys Knight. The show didn't last long, but fans were thrilled just to see him again. His energy was different, though softer, more reflective. He wasn't chasing laughs anymore. He was just being himself. Throughout the 1980 and early 1990, Flip appeared occasionally on talk shows and award ceremonies. Each time he stepped on stage, audiences cheered like it was 1971 again. You could tell how much people still loved him, how much they missed that warmth. But Flip was never one to stay long. He'd give a short, humble thank you, flash that famous smile, and quietly disappear again. As time went on, he avoided interviews and the media altogether. He once told a friend, "I already said what I had to say through laughter." That's how he saw his legacy, not in fame, but in the joy he brought people. By the mid-1990, Flip's health began to decline. He was diagnosed with liver cancer but chose to keep the news private. Only his closest friends and family knew what he was going through. He never wanted pity. That was just who he was. Strong, proud, private. Even as the illness progressed, Flip stayed calm. He spent most of his time at home, surrounded by family, watching old movies, listening to jazz, and reflecting on his life. He didn't fear death. Those who visited him said he still cracked jokes, even from his bed. "If I can make you laugh," he said once, "then I'm still alive." On the 25th of November, 1998, Flip Wilson passed away peacefully at his home in Malibu at the age of 64. The news hit the entertainment world like a wave. Comedians, actors, and musicians from every generation paid tribute to him. Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, and Red Fox had all called him a trailblazer. Younger stars like Jamie Foxx and Chris Rock said Flip showed them that black comedy could be mainstream and sophisticated. In the days following his death, reruns of The Flip Wilson Show aired on cable networks, reminding everyone just how groundbreaking he'd been. Audiences laughed again, cried again, and realized that this man who had once made the world stop and smile had quietly left it without asking for applause. No scandals, no bitterness, no dramatic farewell tour, just grace, humor, and peace. That was the Flip Wilson way. He left behind 4 children, and a legacy that still echoes through comedy today. But somehow, even after all the love he gave, Hollywood still hasn't given him that star on the Walk of Fame. Maybe he didn't need it. Maybe his real star was in the laughter that still rings whenever someone says, "The devil made me do it." When people talk about comedy legends, they often mention names like Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, or Dave Chappelle. But here's the truth, before any of them, there was Flip Wilson. He laid the groundwork. He was the one who showed America that a black comedian could host, produce, and dominate primetime television with grace, wit, and power. Flip didn't just make people laugh, he changed what laughter could mean. His comedy wasn't cruel or divisive. It was clever, universal, and full of soul. He took the everyday experiences of life, work, love, faith, friendship, and turned them into stories everyone could relate to. That's why The Flip Wilson Show didn't feel like black TV or white TV. It was just great TV. He broke down barriers without ever preaching about it. In an era when racism was still thick in the air, Flip used humor as a bridge. He showed that you could address social truths and still keep people smiling. He taught a generation of performers that you could be funny and still be dignified, that comedy didn't have to come at the expense of your identity. His influence is everywhere. Eddie Murphy once said that watching Flip as a kid made him believe he could do it too. Tyler Perry's Medea character? You can see Geraldine's DNA all over that. From In Living Color to Saturday Night Live, the sketch format that Flip mastered became the model for decades of comedy that followed. And let's not forget representation. Flip Wilson wasn't just the first black variety show host, he was the first one to do it his way. He had full creative control. That means every joke, every guest, every sketch passed through his vision first. For a black entertainer in the early 1970s, that was unheard of. Even today, when you see a confident comedian who blends character work, satire, and charm, you're seeing a little piece of Flip Wilson in there. He made laughter an equalizer. He made television more human. And though he never got that Hollywood star, maybe he doesn't need one. Because Flip's true star was never on a sidewalk. It was in the hearts of everyone he made laugh, in every comedian he inspired, and in every barrier he helped break. Man, when you really think about it, Flip Wilson's story is both beautiful and heartbreaking. Here was a man who came from nothing, a foster kid who turned pain into laughter, who went from telling jokes on Air Force bases to becoming the first black superstar of network television. He made the world laugh, broke down walls, and changed what comedy could look like. And yet, despite everything he achieved, there's still no star for Flip Wilson on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. No little piece of marble with his name carved in gold. It doesn't make sense, does it? A man who made millions smile, who brought people together, who literally helped shape modern comedy forgotten by the very town he helped build. That's the part that hurts. But maybe that's what makes Flip so timeless. His worth was never about trophies or stars on the ground, it was about the impact he left behind. You can still feel it today. Every time someone says, "The devil made me do it," every time a comedian tells a smart joke that crosses lines without hate, every time a black performer stands center stage and owns it, that's Flip Wilson's legacy shining through. He showed us that laughter could heal, that comedy could unite, and that you could be proud of who you are while still making the whole world laugh with you. So yeah, maybe Hollywood never gave Flip his star, but for those who remember him, the fans, the families, the comedians he inspired, he'll always be one. Rest easy, Flip Wilson. The devil didn't make you do it. Greatness did.